Trash Talk, we actually vet our sponsors. We don't just take their money and run like a butter bar lieutenant lost on a land nav course. Are you finally ready to plant your flag and claim your territory? Maybe it's time to use that VA loan to buy a home. Or hell, maybe you're looking to refinance and put some extra cash in your pocket for more questionable life decisions. Either way, the Veterans Mortgage Source, powered by Canopy Mortgage, has your six. Look, buying a home or refinancing can feel like getting overrun on a bad op. Chaotic, confusing, and full of obstacles that make no damn sense. That's where Corey and his team come in. They're like the QRF of home loans, ready to pull you out of the chaos and guide you to the best program for you. And trust me, they'll answer all your questions. Yeah, even the dumb ones. Whether you're a salty vet or fresh out of barracks still trying to figure out where your TA-50 went. Great service, solid rates, and a team that actually understands the military life. That's why all of us here at Veteran Trash Talk trust them to do right by every veteran and their family. Ready to lock it in? Give Corey a call or shoot him a text at 808-699-7874. That's 808-699-7874. Don't wait. Unless you like overpaying and getting treated like an FNG. The Veterans Mortgage Source is powered by Canopy Mortgage, LLC. All loans are subject to credit and property approval.
Hey, happy Monday, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great Monday. This mental health warrior. I hope everybody's having a great day. As you can see, I have my guest here, Emily. I'm super excited, and we'll get to her in just a second. The QR codes and other things aren't up on the screen right now. We're having a little bit of technical issues today, but I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, there he is. See, Chris got it up there, so I spoke too soon. But Emily's got an amazing book out. She has an amazing story, and I really think that you guys will really enjoy the show, and I was excited to have her on. And thank you for being patient and waiting, Emily, as we kind of work through our technical difficulties. But before we jump into that, I have to talk a little bit here. And so you see the upper QR code there for Reads Across America. It's a great way that they memorialize the veterans out there during the holiday season. I'm super proud to be part of them. And it's super easy to do. Just scan that QR code for as little as $10. You can donate, to ensure that those wreaths are on the tombstones. And it's a super amazing program they did, and it's something that they continue. And I'm so proud to be part of them. And along with that, Reads Across America Radio. If you didn't know, they have a radio show or radio, and they do replay my podcast at. Hey, Brian, how you doing? They do replay my podcast at Fridays at 8 p.m. and Sundays at 10 p.m. And it's super easy to find. You just download the iHeartRadio app, the TuneIn app, or the Odyssey app and search for Reads Across America for not only my great podcast, and they have like 70 other podcasts on the show. Something that's pretty amazing. As you can see, Lynn is not on the podcast tonight. Her daughter has a soccer game. And so unfortunately, sometimes family does come first. And so she's at her daughter's soccer game. And so I wish her daughter good luck on her soccer game and hope they win. But you see the thing up there for 10th Mountain Bourbon Whiskey, it's great, amazing. If you're a drinker, you should give them a try because their bourbon is absolutely amazing. I don't know why my face is so red. I keep screwing with my lighting, but it keeps changing. So I'm going to go from red face to regular face, but don't worry, I'm not mad or angry or anything like that. And of course, Veterans Mortgage, you saw the video at the beginning. You can scan that QR code. Interest rates will probably be coming down on houses. And finally, PCS to Paradise. They are out in Hawaii. And so if you're thinking about moving, relocating, I live here in Italy. You can scan that QR code. They are out in Hawaii. And maybe you can find that dream home out in Hawaii and find your new location to live, a vacation home or a home. Now I'm going to take a deep breath. So, Emily, how are you today? And how are things in your neck of the woods?
I'm great, Cliff. I'm jealous that you're in Italy, but I'm in South Florida, which isn't so shabby either.
Florida's not bad.
Yeah, we have some nice weather here, and the humidity hasn't hit us yet, so we're going to enjoy it while we can.
For my listeners out there, if you read the little blurb I put out about Emily and her bio, and we're going to jump into her story with what, she wrote about it in her book, and I'm going to let her talk about that and kind of tell her her story and why she's here and what she wants to talk about. Which you can talk about anything you want, but it's a moving story, and I tell you why. Because I think for me as a veteran, I'm a veteran. I'm a suicide survivor, and having PTSD and those other issues. Sometimes we forget the impact that it has on the families. And it can have just as much devastating impact on the families as it does on the service member. And I think, with what your story and what you talk about, really is gonna not only help the veterans, but I think it's also gonna help the family members.
Mhm. I hope so. Actually, my story has been resonating very much with readers, military families, not only military families, but people who have been touched by mental health or suicide loss.
Hmm.
And my story is a fiction novel, but it's inspired by my father's struggle with PTSD and his soldier suicide after serving in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War era.
Do
My
you? What years did he serve in Vietnam?
let me just say he was not in country. Obviously, people were sent all over the world. My father had the crap luck of being sent to the Korean DMZ, which
Oh,
was
okay.
no picnic, combat zone.
Nope. Nope.
30.
It is not.
He was part of the First Cavalry Division, Howitzer Battalion. I know he had the designation of Army sharpshooter. And from what I understand, it was a very volatile area. I have some pictures of him serving with just watchtowers and miles of
Mhm.
barbed wire fence with Charlie just on the other side. So I really don't know much about his service because obviously most veterans, especially back then, didn't talk about it. And
Yep.
I was such a very young girl at the time. So I do know that only from what I've researched, and I could find very little on the Korean DMZ during the Vietnam War era. So I began my research. I fell down a rabbit hole and started researching the Vietnam War, which I never learned about in school because it was a taboo topic back then. Nobody
Mhm.
wanted to talk about it. So all these years later, I really just got so interested in it and researching and learning what our GIs went through and just what was happening all around the world and in the United States during this turbulent time with the anti-war movement heating up. And so my father served I believe he enlisted in around 1962. So he was in the DMZ probably 62 to 64-ish.
Hmm.
And he had some mental wounds and had to finish out the rest of his service. So the military allowed him to switch over to the U.S. Navy, where he served on the USS Wasp. And there, he went all over the world, and I think they recovered some of the Gemini astronauts as they returned home in the capsules. And but I do remember my grandmother saying that he was never the same when he came home after the army and before he went over to the Navy, he was never the same. So I don't know what he endured, but I could only imagine what he may have experienced and what other GIs there may have experienced, because he was always seeming to look for Charlie.
Yeah.
Um,
You
that
know,
might
I,
never left.
like you, and of course, my father didn't serve in Vietnam, but I had a lot of relatives that served, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War. And I've been to war myself. I deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and it does change you. And it does, there's nothing good about war at all. I'll say that right now. There's no good outcome for that. And for people that live through that, it's very hard, and it's hard to explain how you feel the way you feel about certain things when you come back. And just like in Vietnam, but in World War II, they called it shell shock and other things.
Combat.
There are things that you shouldn't see as a human being, I think, and you see those things in war a lot. And then just always knowing whether you're going to be alive here today or tomorrow, it affects people in everybody differently because we're all different, but it does affect you mentally, and it does have an effect on you throughout your life, even once you come home, because you still always relive those memories. And I'm sure you experienced that with your father at times. They probably didn't understand it at your age.
Oh, I didn't understand it at all because I was still very young. I was 9 years old when he took
Mhm.
his life after at least two other suicide attempts that I'm aware of. Like you, one was an overdose,
Yeah,
and very hard to talk about for me. But yeah, seeing your father laying there in the threshold of his bedroom, snoring loudly, and pill bottles all over the place, and your mother frantic, calling the paramedics, and him being wheeled out of the house. And yeah, that was really, really difficult to witness. But my mom was really, really gentle with us with that, and we all understood that he was sick. She
yeah,
said he's mentally sick, and he can't help it. And unfortunately, like with a lot of other military families, there was domestic violence in the home too when he would
yeah.
have episodes. So my poor mom was on the receiving end of that. But she loved him and still loves him to this day. She never remarried, and she understood. She's a strong military wife, I say, and the strongest
Yeah.
one I know. Yeah.
And that's. And how old were you when your father passed?
I was only 9.
Oh, you were 9. So he did that night that you just talked about?
No, yeah,
Oh, okay.
no.
Just later on.
Not far after that, a few months
Yeah.
later, because after the overdose, he was sent to a mental health facility. And in the 1970s, mental health isn't what it is now.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
It wasn't helpful, and he knew he wasn't getting any better, and he was afraid he was going to really hurt us. And he had told my mom that, he didn't want to hurt us,
Yeah.
and he knew he wasn't getting better. So I understand to a degree. I don't know you obviously personally, Cliff, but I'm glad you're here, and because you're needed in this world, and your story is needed too. You know, we
Well, I
come.
think that live stories always resonate well with people, and for you as a child, as a 9-year old, I have a 10-year old boy. I have a 21-year-old and a 10-year-old, and so I couldn't imagine what he was going through. Because even like you say, your father was sick and you knew he was sick, you still lost your father, right? I mean, I lost my father. Of course, he was in the 70s, and I still miss him today. I couldn't imagine going through that as a child. And how did you have brothers and sisters? You didn't say, but I'm assuming you did in conversations. How did it affect them, and how did you guys work through that? And I'm assuming your mom was a big proponent of that. It sounds like she was a very strong woman, moving forward.
She had to be, but
Yeah,
after his death, we just kind of all got quiet about it, and I don't know if we didn't know how to cope with it.
yeah,
At that time, there was no counseling services offered to us. And, 3 or 4 weeks later, I had to go back to school and start fourth grade like nothing happened.
yeah,
And that was really hard because I lived in a very small town, and a lot of the kids knew my family, or their grandparents were friends with my grandparents. And I got bullied over.
yeah.
Kids can be cruel. And yeah, I was bullied over the fact that my father took his life.
Hmm.
And that
Well,
was,
it's sad, but they looked at it differently back then.
yeah. And
It was not. It was a very cultural no-no,
yes.
for lack of a better term.
And especially my father, being of Portuguese descent and very religious background, his family, they were afraid he wouldn't go to heaven, and my mom was afraid to go to heaven, and I know he's in heaven, and I know he's at peace now.
Yeah.
And
And that's the hardest thing. The guest I had on last week, her husband had, completed suicide, and it was about 2 years ago, and they have 6 kids, blended kids. But it's just like what we're talking about tonight. It's one. I understand what your father was going through as much as I can understand it, because I went through similar things after 9/11, and the downward spiral that takes you on, and you don't understand why you're feeling that way. I didn't have a family. I wasn't married at the time, so my situation was a little bit different. But you don't understand it, and you can't cope with it. So then you learn to cope with it in other ways. You start drinking, maybe you start taking, different pills. And it's not because at that point you're trying to hurt yourself. You're trying to normalize something that cannot be normalized.
Right.
And that's the struggle I think a lot of veterans deal with, is because you think if you can normalize it, then you can move on and forget about it, right? But you can never normalize it.
Yeah. It's a scar. It's just not a visible scar. And I think that's what people didn't realize back then. You
No.
would see the other, Vietnam veterans or other veterans with missing limbs that you can visually see, but
Hmm.
you can't see a mental wound.
Yeah.
And people get afraid of it,
Yeah.
because a lot of times with a mental wound, there is violence and outbursts that people don't understand. But there are a lot of families that are suffering and going through this. And there was a 60 Minutes episode not even a year ago on military families and PTSD, mental health. And, I'm just, I never thought that I would be in this, role now as
Yeah.
an author and someone advocating for veteran mental health, because I held this in me for so long, Cliff. I went 40 something years without ever talking about this. And then
Yeah.
when this little book here was published last July on my father's birthday,
Oh, well, hold it up a little bit more. We didn't see the whole book. You could cut off a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
I realized the importance of what I had here, that it wasn't just a novel, but a novel with a purpose to raise awareness of mental health and PTSD and
Mhm.
the mistreatment of our veterans of the Vietnam era and other eras. And, that, we have a lot of work to do still, even though the story takes place back in the 70s, over 50 years ago, at the tail end of the Vietnam War. Everything that's in here is so relevant to today still.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And, the times even the times today are mirroring that, with all these
Hmm.
protests and, you know, the government hostility. And it's just, it will take readers back, but I think readers have been really relating to it a lot just because of the times that we're going through now. Are so
Yeah. Well, and I think too that how we look at mental health and how we deal with mental health is obviously way different. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. And I think that's what we struggle with. Is the problem is with my generation, and for me to get to the point where I wanted to unalive myself, it was a process, and that process took a while. It was nothing quick, and having the violent outbursts and drinking and all that stuff went along with it. But nowadays, sadly, is these younger generations, they make that decision in 2 seconds.
Mhm.
And they are making a permanent life decision based on something that could change tomorrow, not realizing at that moment. And then how do you address it, and how do you stop somebody to think for a second that maybe what you're doing isn't right? Now, I know after my suicide attempt and I woke up in the hospital, it scared the crap out of me, because I get asked a lot, what did you think when you woke up in the hospital? I realized the levity of what I did, and how that wasn't the right way to go about it. And so instead of, lying to my counselor and trying to get that rubber stamp to go back on duty, I went back into counseling and started being honest about it. But that wasn't easy. It's easy for me to talk about now, but that was an easy conversation, because one, after my suicide attempt and the hospital contacted my doctor in Virginia, he knew I'd been lying to him for the last year,
Yeah.
you know, which
Yeah.
means he was prescribing me the wrong medications because he was treating me for symptoms I didn't have.
Right.
And that's why I talk about it. It's so important to find a counselor that you trust and that you have that relationship with, because if you don't, like me, they're probably going to treat you for something you don't need to be treated with, which could have led up to my suicide attempt with what we know about the medications. I'm talking about, I think it was oh, the sleep medication. They had people and they find out later on that it caused them to have suicide. But
Will be
um,
or
you know,
something
you
like.
just don't know. And so he was treating the wrong symptoms, but that was my fault, not his fault.
And I actually have a chapter in my book like that, where my main character, Russ Ayers, who's a U.S. Army tunnel rat, is he's back home, and his wife urges him to get some help, and he's going for some counseling after his overdose, and he's lying
Yeah.
to the psychiatrist and blatantly, and counting his nose hairs and doing anything and making jokes about his tie, and
Yeah.
going out for a drink. Ever have a
Hmm.
Harvey Wallbanger? You should try one. They're good, doc. And
Yeah.
he's totally in denial about trying to get the heat off of him, and yeah, almost like that chapter I was writing to show how he almost contributed to his own demise by not being forthright in what he
Yeah.
was experiencing. Yeah, so yeah, like you can be a detriment to yourself sometimes if you're not
Hmm.
allowing
Well,
yourself.
because they don't want to talk about, because they don't want to relive the experience, right? And you know as well as I do, Emily, when you suffer trauma and you had trauma before that trauma, you can't skip the trauma. So if you had childhood trauma or some other trauma, and now you're dealing with PTSD trauma, you have to go back and fix the first trauma first before you can fix the second one. You can't really skip it. And that becomes difficult because a lot of people don't want to ever relive the first trauma.
Right. And for me too, like I didn't realize that I had been through trauma.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, you lost your father at 9. How could you not?
I know, but because just, life went back to normal, try to get back to normal, and life went on, and I carried this through my whole life. Like I knew something wasn't right inside me, and it wasn't until I moved out away from my hometown in Massachusetts down here to South Florida about 5 years ago that I say something inside me grew quiet, and it wasn't until I was away from my place of origin that I was able to really start reflecting on things and really
Mhm.
um, start saying, gee, I think I need to do some work here on myself. And I had tried to go to a counselor once or twice before, but, it wasn't a fit for me.
Yeah.
I find the counselors, in the general public, they didn't know what to say to me. They were asking me questions like, and I would be like, are you kidding me? They were like, did you find him? Or,
Right.
standard questions like, do you feel guilty? No, I didn't
Yeah.
feel. I was 9 years old. I had nothing to do with me, but
Right.
I'm out of here. So,
Yeah.
so,
Well, and that's a hard part, right? Too. So, like when I go into counseling, and I have a hard time with it now because they want to talk about my suicide tip. Well, my suicide tip isn't the reason I'm here. I'm here for a completely different reason.
yeah,
But they
yeah.
want to spend 3 months talking about that. Well, it's a waste of time. That's not why I'm here. I'm not going back down that road again. It's frustrating.
Right, right. So for me, the way I got to write this book was because, I've been a clinical dental hygienist for 35 years
Yeah.
this year, and I had done some assignments at the VA in Massachusetts, and I spent time at the Newport Naval Base in Rhode Island as part of my training years ago. And that was the first time I was really around the veteran community or the military community. And I remember when I had to go to the VA hospital, I was very afraid. I never told my professors that I was afraid to go there, but I was because I knew there was a lot of mental health. And
Yeah.
I got through that assignment. It was an eye opener for me. But I just remember my heart beating really fast when I was there. And I was like, I was almost afraid because I was thinking back to my father's, outbursts that he used to have. I didn't know what to expect. But anyway, it ended up being a great experience for me, and I got to see another side of the mental health, treatment for our vets, and so it wasn't until I moved to Florida that I met this wonderful woman named Janice, and she was a patient of mine. She came in one day and she invited me to her writing group that she had
Hmm.
started. She was 93 years old, and she was from Massachusetts like me,
Oh,
and
wow.
we had a shared commonality in that her husband and my father were both veterans who had suffered with PTSD.
Hmm.
So she just took me in and like under her wing. And I say, whether you call it divine intervention or whatever you call it,
Right.
some
Hmm.
put in your path at a certain time in life for a certain reason. So I go to this writing group and I sit down there all these, cute little old ladies, and
Hmm.
they're I'm like, I felt so out of place, but that they were great. They served as the developmental editors for my novel. Each week I would go and read a chapter, and I still go to this day. They're just wonderful people, and they've been here with me for the whole journey. And unfortunately, Janice passed away just 6 months after I met her.
Oh no.
I got to see the book completed, but I said I had, and they all said at the writing group, you have to finish it for Janice. And never did I even think I would have it published. And like I said, be talking to you today. And it's just been a wild journey, really. Like,
So with that, tell my audience. I know you showed your book a little bit. Of course, we have a radio show, and the radio show people won't be able to see. But tell everybody, about your book, what's in it. Really, what was your motivation to write? I'm assuming it was a healing process for you once you started that. For a lot of people that suffer trauma or have trauma in their life, writing, doing art, and things like that is an amazing way to kind of help get you through that. I know with my book and writing with my good friend Dr. Kramer. It was the same way. It was kind of a different experience. It's hard to explain, right? It just felt like something being lifted off of me
yes,
in doing that.
yes,
And I'm sure you probably felt similar to that. But go
yeah,
ahead and just tell my audience a little bit about your book, what's in it, uh,
yeah.
those kinds of things.
So, Beneath the Swaying Willow, I'll read a little synopsis on the back, if you like, on the back of the book, where, it's a riveting account of love, sacrifice, and human struggle. It shines a light on the destructive, ugly side of humanity, while also showing how the courage of just one person can be positive change, the catalyst for positive change to occur. So, tensions are running high in 1970 throughout the United States as the anti-war movement heats up and a second wave of feminism washes over the nation. And Nora Thompson and Russ Ayers, a young couple with a bright future ahead of them, find themselves suddenly torn apart when he is drafted and deployed to Vietnam. And Nora grows anxious when months pass by with no word from Russ, who is doing his best to serve his country and survive the hell of war. And feeling alone and trapped by her overbearing mother's demands, the closed-minded thinkers in her small New England hometown, and by society's expectations of her, Nora begins to question who she is and what she wants out of life. And fate soon fills the unwanted wedge between Russ and Nora with new experiences, forever changing who they are and the trajectory of their lives. Scars are concealed, secrets are kept, and when things spiral out of control, Nora must draw upon her inner strength to stand up for what she believes in and fight injustice. It's only then that she's able to find her true self, and that secret she's been keeping is unveiled. So basically, it's inspired by true events, by my father's struggle with PTSD and a soldier suicide, but also by my mother's steadfast love and devotion to him, and by everything happening around the world at that time. When I began my research, I started just with magazine, newspaper articles, and just watching documentaries. I became fascinated with interviews of the Vietnam veterans, and I just I found the research I really enjoyed, but the writing
Yeah.
itself was very arduous.
Yes.
I had to kind of sit here at my desk and channel everything and close my eyes and go back to 1970, whatever, and just remember events in my home and things that had happened. And that was very painful to go through.
Yeah.
But I realized that pain was part of me healing through my craft.
Yeah.
And as I went on, I learned it was very cathartic, and I really wanted to not forget my dad, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. I felt like I was starting to forget him at this
Yeah.
stage of my life. And I also feel like a lot of people are forgetting about the Vietnam veterans, or
Yeah.
maybe a lot of people still aren't even educated on the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And these are the old guys now, right?
Yeah.
Who are dying off. And I really wanted this book to serve as a history lesson. I spent a lot of time researching, and I wanted to get it right, the essence of the whole time period. And so I also wanted to show how our GIs were treated in country and upon their return home. So, and I wanted to show how
You know,
they
that's something no American soldier should ever have to deal with, is what they dealt with
how
coming home from the Vietnam War. That was absolutely ridiculous.
yeah, they weren't welcome home, and they were chastised and for doing their job. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. And this will bring me back to a little story I have regarding the book. I knew when I was writing this story what the final chapter was going to be, um, because it was based on a true experience in my hometown when I was growing up.
What
About
hometown did you grow up in, Massachusetts? I'm curious.
Somerset, Massachusetts. It's a small little hometown about 15 or 20 minutes east of Providence, Rhode Island, next to Fall
Okay.
River, South Coast. It's a great little town and great people.
So my wife's from Worcester originally,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and then we were married actually in Barre, Massachusetts,
Okay,
at
yes.
Hartman Farms, the big Hartman Farm. So
Wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah. So, I grew up in a great town, really. But, like I said, things weren't understood back then and things weren't handled gently like they are now. Thank God things have changed. But this parade, when I was about 10 years old, this had to be 1980,
yeah.
5 years after the fall of Saigon and 7 years after our troops left Vietnam, and a year after my father died by soldier suicide, that we were at this parade and sitting right in front of the public library or the town hall, and everybody's sitting there, standing up and clapping for everybody that's coming by, all the different groups, World War II and Korea veterans, and all
Hmm.
of a sudden everybody starts sitting down. And I'm looking around, I'm saying, why is everybody sitting down? So I'm a 10-year-old kid. I'm just following the crowd and I sit down too.
Right.
My mother looks down at me. She says, stand back up. I said, why, Mommy? Everybody else is sitting down. She says, stand up. And that's all she said. And here come a small group of Vietnam veterans. It couldn't have been more than 6 of them,
Mm.
waving the flag, carrying
Yeah.
the banner. They look like they're on high alert. They knew they weren't welcome. And everybody is sitting down except for my mother and my siblings. And I say,
Wow.
and I'll never forget the look in their eyes as they looked at us. And I'm like, something's happening here.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, but I knew it felt bad. You know, it was a real negative feeling, and I just felt like
Well,
something.
kudos for your mom for being strong enough to stand up under
Yeah,
an order.
and
Mhm.
I've always remembered that look in their eye, and as a 10-year-old kid, what impact that had on me, and that has stuck with me for my whole life.
Yeah.
So I knew, not to give any spoilers away, but I knew that was how the book was going to end, is with a parade scene. And I think it's some of my best writing, where I kind of bring it home at the end. And but it shows that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that
Yeah.
people will start um, to have some empathy for our Vietnam veterans and start to understand our veterans' struggles. And that's the message that I kind of wanted to get across.
You know, that reminds me of a story too. When I came out of Iraq, I was obviously flying back home, and I was in the airport, and two gentlemen sitting next to me at the bar. I just ordered water, and they said, "We'd like to buy you a drink," and I said, "Sure." And so they bought me a beer, and then I got to visiting with them. They were both in the Vietnam War, and I said, "Well, I want to buy you a beer because one, you never should have dealt with what you dealt with coming home, and I appreciate the fact that Vietnam veterans were very adamant about the fact that when American soldiers came back from the Iraq War, that they did not
Right.
deal with that, and they were
That,
not going to tolerate that from anybody."
that's
And I
right.
was so thankful about that, and because nobody should, and they were going to make sure nobody dealt with that. I mean, because how many Vietnam veterans did we lose who made it through the war, but because of the way they were treated after they got back home? And that's really the untold story and the sad part of it all.
Mhm.
Because then you're ashamed of something that you didn't have no control over because a lot of them were drafted. That's why the whole VFW started. Was it was a safe place where these Vietnam veterans could go and talk and have those conversations where they didn't have a place before, a safe place to go to.
Yeah. However, in my research, I did learn that the National VFW did recognize the Vietnam veterans, but each individual hall could make their own rules, and
Hmm.
that a lot of them did not welcome the Vietnam veterans
Hmm.
because it was not a war. It was
Right.
military
There's
pleasing.
a conflict.
Yes, a conflict, yes. So I have that in my book also, when my character Russ goes to try to get membership and he's turned away. I don't remember my father ever having any support that I'm aware of within the military community. I think he probably maybe withdrew, and as a lot of those veterans did, didn't talk about things with other people and may just want to forget, try to get on with their lives.
So I have a question for you. So as you were writing your book, how did your brothers and sisters and your mom feel about that? Were they supportive? Because sometimes families cannot be supportive because they don't want to relive the pain or the thought.
Yeah,
And I would just from
yeah,
curiosity, and how did
yeah.
they feel about that?
They've all been very supportive of me. And people ask me, well, why didn't you just tell your story? Because Janice, who I had met in the writing group, she told me to tell it in my own way. In my own way, I didn't want to, I'm still very private
Hmm.
and protective of my family. And my mom is still alive. And my brothers and sister have dealt with it in their own way too.
Yeah.
So I'm very mindful not to drag our family through this again. But yeah, I'm also very mindful that there are so many families that don't talk about this, and
Yes.
so many families that are impacted by mental health, soldier suicide, and just other military struggles. And until you start talking about this and normalizing conversations, it's never going to feel any better. And I know that that's what this has done for me. For the first time in my life, I feel part of a military family. I've been welcomed as a military daughter.
Hmm.
I have a friend here in South Florida who was a Vietnam veteran, Air Force illustrator who served at the Tan Son Nhut Air Base in 1968 in Vietnam. And I have another dear friend who I haven't been able to meet in person yet, but she's a Vietnam veteran nurse from Seattle, Washington, who operated on our wounded GIs in the Cu Chi
Oh,
district,
wow.
where my book takes place. So she read my book and I read hers, and we offered each other reviews. And she said she had to put my book down. She said it took me right back to the war. And she said it felt so real to me the way I described the hospital and where she was. So that, because I haven't been there myself,
Right.
that meant a lot to me because I knew I got it right. And
And that had to make you feel really good. But that's one thing about PTSD, and I talk about people all the time is you can be reading something, you could hear something, you could smell something, and it comes right back, right? In an instant, it comes back, and that's very hard to deal with. And that's one thing that we do here on my podcast with Mental Health Warrior and also with Veterans Trash Talk, is we try to give a place where veterans or families of veterans, or even friends of veterans. You don't have to be a veteran to come on my podcast. But, we all have similar occurrences. We all have similar stories and similar things that happen in our life. And, to tell a story differently or tell a story in your own way was probably the best thing you could have done to tell your story. Because if you try to force something that's not there, it's not going to come out right. You know as well as I do, Emily, right?
yeah, and like I said, some of the things I didn't want to remember. Some of the things were so painful and traumatizing that I didn't want to put those in a book, because that's my own private story.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to handle it with care. And I knew the power that this story has. And, I wanted to really honor those we've lost and those who are struggling. You know,
Well, Emily, I think you have done that. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. We can get it wrapped up here. I did share your link on your link to your website on the chat there, so people can click on that. They can order your book through your website. Is that correct?
not directly through my website, Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
You can order it through independent bookstores, Amazon.
So just wherever you buy books, but they can't. But there's a link on your website, right, to get to
Yeah,
it.
they're
Yeah.
linked,
Okay.
purchasing
Yeah.
link. Yeah, absolutely. Or you can just go to like one of the major booksellers' websites, and you should be able to find it on there. Posted
And
on a lot.
and before we came on the show, you were talking about you have a book signing coming up this Saturday.
Yes, I have another Barnes and Noble one coming up on Saturday, that's Independent Bookstore Day, I believe. But yeah,
Okay.
I've been really, boots on the ground trying to get this story out there. I've done a lot of
And
talk.
where's that going to be at? Is it in Florida?
Yes, in Sunrise, Florida. Yep, on Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. Yep.
Okay, well, if you're in the Florida area, I knew I have a lot of guests that watch the show that are from the Florida area. You know where you can go and see Emily and visit her during her book signing and get a signed copy of her book. Um, it's truly an amazing story, and I think it's one that doesn't get told too often as the impact that it has on the families moving forward with the Vietnam War and all that. And so I want to appreciate you for actually doing that. I know it wasn't easy. I want to appreciate you for coming on the show and talk about the things that you did talk about, because I know it resonated well with our audience here and with everybody listening. And so I want to thank you for that. I know it's not easy.
Well, I thank you for having me on the show, Cliff, and for all you do for raising awareness of mental health and PTSD and helping our veterans and others.
Well, like I say a lot in my show is I believe I survived mine for a reason and I shouldn't have. And so all I can do until I'm no longer on this earth is try to help as many as I can. I had a visit with the CEO of Able Channel. I want to tell the story real quick and then we'll close out the show. And we were just talking about, they had the Surviving Suicide series they filmed on me. We won an Emmy last year with that. And we were talking
Awesome.
about maybe a follow up and just some other things with that. Yeah. I never thought in my million years I'd win an Emmy. But this executive producer, Paul Grogan, he lost his father in Vietnam War. As a matter of fact, his mother was pregnant with him, so he never met his father.
That's
And for the longest time, Brian was telling me that he never knew that part of that story from Paul. He never talked about it.
yeah.
And so how many of those stories out there? And I think with your book and how you tell your story, maybe more stories will come out of people that had to deal with that and stuff. And so when we was at the Emmys, since we were, the Emmys are a long time, right? You sit at the table for a very long time, 6.5 hours we were there.
Oh.
And then you sit there and you talk to him, and we had those conversations about, he just heard stories of his father because he didn't know him. He was, in his mother's womb. So it was very impactful. And there's a lot of, families out there that are impacted with all the wars after the Vietnam War. And it's very hard to go through. But hey, with that, I want to say thank you to everybody who's listening to the show. It's great on the chat. Brian, you have a great time. And yes, it was a great show. And we want to thank Emily very much for coming on.
Thank you.
But just like I said in the beginning, you can scan that QR code for Reach Across America. It's, just like I talked about the way they memorialize the veterans and what they do during the holiday season. It's amazing. But along with that, a lot of people don't know this, is you can have a personalized wreath put on there. It costs a little bit extra money, but they will personalize it. So you can scan that and get your personalized wreath if you choose so. So even though I'm in Italy, in Napoli, Italy, I am originally from Virginia. And so the area that I am is Arlington Cemetery, but the outside Arlington Cemetery, obviously, they make sure that cemeteries all across the United States, have those wreaths on those tombstones. So it's very important. And just like I said, Wreaths Across America Radio, we plays my podcast at Fridays at 8 p.m. and Sundays at 10 p.m. And it's super easy to find. Just download the iHeartRadio app, the TuneIn app, and the Odyssey app, and search for Wreaths Across America Radio, for the Mental Health Warrior podcast and all the other podcasts they have, and the great music and all the wonderful things they do with it. And I'm super proud that they second year now I've been with them on the radio show. So super happy. I know you've been on a couple of shows too, Emily, with Wreaths Across America Radio. So
The second one. Yeah.
yeah. And
Great
then of course, go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's a great organization. And I actually
Yeah.
was able to donate quite a bit of money from a book sale in my hometown in Massachusetts to my town's chapter of Wreaths Across America last year.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yay, bravo. What's it? Bravo. As they say here in Italy, when I'm at work and I don't mess up. But we know we got 10th Mountain Whiskey there. If you're not a bourbon drinker, I was a Scotch drinker for a lot of years, but they have a bourbon that they age in sherry barrels that is absolutely amazing. Hey, don't worry, Matthew, if you missed the show, they replay it, or you can rewatch it on wherever you watch your podcast at, to include on Facebook and all the other areas. So, hey, you got the Veterans Mortgage. You're going to see that video at the beginning of the show. They talk about mortgage rates are going to drop. And so, hey, give it a look. You see, maybe you want to refinance your house, build a deck, or, put a she shed in the back for your wife or something. But then you got PCS to Paradise. You can scan on that. They are in Hawaii. So maybe you want to go find a beachfront property. You build your wife a she shed in the backyard, and then you go buy yourself a property out in Hawaii to go get away from and visit. But I'm just joking right now. But hey, Let's see what he said. Decided yet. But hey, everybody, you guys have a great week. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully next week Lynn will be on the show. And Chris, my producer, I want to say shout out to him. He started a new job today. He got a promotion at work, and so that's kind of why we start a little bit late. But that's life, and it's always how it is. But hey, you all take care out there. Have a great and wonderful week. And remember, we are our brothers and sisters keeper out there. So if you have a friend or a family member that kind of got quiet or things don't just seem right, take an extra second just to see how they're doing, because it can always make all the difference in the world. But with that, everybody take care. Emily, stay on after we close out the show. I'll talk to you afterwards. But everybody take care and have a great week.